Welcome to Hungry for Answers with me, Robin Clare, recovery coach professional. Do you love food, alcohol, drugs, sex, social media, cigarettes, or gambling a little too much? The traditional narrative says that addiction to these vices is the problem. The truth is, they are just symptoms. This hit show takes you from recovery to your ultimate life as my special guests and I help you discover how underneath every vice is the addiction to the suffering that developed due to unhealed trauma. So what can you do? Hungry for Answers provides groundbreaking, proven solutions from my best-selling spiritual book, Feast and Famine: Healing Addiction with Grace. It's time to stop suffering and start living your ultimate life. You have a divine right to a life filled with love, joy, peace, and abundance. Hungry for Answers starts now. Welcome to Hungry for Answers with me, Robin Clare. I'm really excited about my guest today, Marianne Pack. She's a spiritual medium, an author, and a joy advocate. And I love the name Joy Advocate, because as you just heard in my opening, we have a divine right to a life filled with love, joy, peace, and abundance. So I'm excited to talk about our topic today is finding joy in recovery. So welcome, Marianne.
Thank you, Robin. I so appreciate the invitation to share with you.
Yeah, that's great. So I always ask my guests the same first question, and that is, have you ever been so hungry for answers in your life that you didn't know where the answers were coming from? And then when they arrived, you might have been surprised what you found out or just grateful for what you found out.
Absolutely. I am a questioner. I love to seek out more knowledge and learn things. And so always looking, always questioning and asking. So many times I'm just surprised, and I'm so grateful for what I've learned so that I can implement it in my life.
Yeah. And, I'm thinking about what you're talking about with uh, looking for answers, right? I I'm going through in a particularly stressful time in my life with elder parents and and I was thinking before we came on that th- I want to make sure that I'm grateful and joyful for the times that things were easier and to when things are easy to really give myself the opportunity to receive and express as much joy as possible, because right now it feels a little hard, and it does come pretty naturally to me. I'm a glass half full type of person, but I notice that it's harder. It's harder when I'm feeling the stress of obligations, family obligations, and my own dealing with my own sense of mourning and different things. And so I just find that interesting. So later, I'd love to talk more about that, about finding simple ways to remember the joy when things are hard, but also to remember the joy when things are good. So we'll get to that a little later. But one of the first things I wanted to ask you was, do you have a recovery story? And can you share it with our audience?
I do. For me, I considered myself a religious refugee,
Mhm.
working towards my own spiritual sovereignty. So, in the religion that I was born and raised in and lived in for 40 plus years, it was a very limiting belief system, very closed in, very sequestered kind of way to live. And so that limited who I was in the world,
Mhm.
because I was told as a woman, you're not your wants, needs, or desires. Your your life is to be a sacrifice for
Mhm.
others, and especially the men in your life,
Mhm.
rather than what you wanted to do or be or have. So coming from that kind of a belief system, and then asking those questions, evaluating those beliefs when it finally clicked that this life wasn't working, it was too toxic for me. And then being able to start asking those questions. Why do I believe what I believe? Does
Mhm.
it feel good to my soul? Or is it something that I need to let go of and install new beliefs? So, yeah, moving through that and becoming my own spiritual sovereign
Mhm.
was, allowed me to actually live in the thriving of joy and the peace and the clarity. And
Yeah.
so that's,
So just going back to what you were saying, in in this religious structure, it was almost like you were required in a way to be a good Christian, let's say,
yes.
and find joy in the service to others, regardless of how it felt to yourself. And so were you able to find joy there in that service model?
Not as much as I would like, because it always seemed more dutiful
Yeah.
rather than a service of joy, which is
Yes.
different from the way I live now.
Mhm.
Now, if I'm serving, it's because of the outpouring, the overflowing of joy. I want to do those things. Before it was, this is your duty, this is how you are supposed to live, and it's very much more restrictive. So it's joy would be just conditional. If I just felt like I was doing the right thing, if I was following the rules, the dogma, and then I could allow myself to feel better about it. But then when I got resentful because I had to do something I didn't want to do, it was so difficult to find that joy.
Yeah, and then thinking lately, I've been watching a lot of shows on streaming that are like period pieces,
Mhm.
and where women just really had no joy.
Yes.
They were really scared for their life most of the time. And I'm thinking that joy for women is almost this joy that you're talking about, this unconditional joy really is new for women in particular. And I'm not sure men have actually found it, but we're going to talk about women at the moment. Like it's really a new thing for us to be able to be joyful in our own in by design in our own life. Would you agree with that?
Absolutely. When you're not sovereign, there's not much joy to be found
Hmm.
because you're living your life under somebody else's rule. When you don't feel like you have say over your life, it's very
Hmm.
difficult to find that joy. And so as women now are finding that they can unmute their voices, they can speak up for what they desire, they can have what they desire, then we're writing a new story of who we are,
Hmm.
and that it is our birthright, that it is who we are on the inside, that spirit, that soul, that eternal part of us.
And really, I'm just reiterating this that this has only happened for us in the last 100 years.
Oh, absolutely.
So, if you're having trouble with that, to the listeners, if you don't know where to find that or what that looks like, it's okay. That's
Mhm.
why there's folks like Marianne in the world whose work is to teach you how to find that joy. So don't feel bad if you don't know where your joy is. Get your joy on. I remember there's a cute cartoon that I have in my pictures of this little girl, and she's just like dancing in a puddle, and it says "Get your joy on," and I'm like, I love that because we haven't always. It hasn't been about joy, and yet in my opening, I said we have a divine right to a life of love, joy, peace, and abundance. So, getting back to your recovery story, Marianne, how would you define religious trauma?
It's any kind of a belief system that, again, I have to go back to limiting our sovereignty.
Yeah.
deciding what we want and how we want to live our lives. So when you have the rule book or any kind of belief that usurps your sovereignty is a trauma. And so many times people say, but I wasn't raised in a religion, but I still have all this trauma. Well, that's why I tend to call it indoctrinated trauma, because we can learn these indoctrinations, these beliefs that are so limiting and suppressing our lives and our sovereignty through, it doesn't have to be religion. It could be our family taught us you only can do this a certain way. And if you
Mhm.
step out of those bounds to do it the way you want to do it, then you're reprimanded for it. Or, your culture, your society. So anything, to me, it's not just about religious, because there are people who feel like, well, I'm not, I don't have religious trauma, but you have indoctrinated trauma.
Mhm. Mhm. And so let's just define the word sovereign. You have been saying it all along, but for folks who don't know what it means to live as your sovereign, I would really love for you to define that for them.
For me, sovereign means that I get to say how I live my life. I get to choose, that I have choices. Just like you were talking about the period pieces that you've been watching, I have also been watching some period pieces where women are so suppressed and don't have a right, don't have a choice. So to me, when I think about being sovereign, I think about I get to choose my beliefs, that they feel good to my soul, that they resonate with who I am, um, and that I have the choice to actually live them out and express them in the world as who I am.
Yeah. So in thinking about archetypes, archetypes are psychological patterns that are consistent across all of humanity. And so when we think about the queen archetype, that is the sovereign. That is someone who is able to choose for their own life and make decisions that feel good to them. And the shadow archetype, meaning the opposite of the queen archetype, is typically the child archetype,
Mhm.
which is someone who relies on others to tell them how to live their lives. So you can even see that in the archetypes, that there is, the child is is something that we have to be aware of. That we have to make sure that we're living in our sovereign, whether it's for, from in all of our lives, so that we can be the most abundant version of ourselves, and that what we're doing for our lives is what is most important. And um and not to say that you don't take into consideration the rest of the people in your life, or society, but you have to know what is true, your truth,
Yes.
and how to live according to that. So what was the moment for you that you knew something had a shift in your life, in your recovery story, your religious recovery story?
Mine was because of the toxic beliefs that I had, and I took them on. I embodied these beliefs, and it created so much the trauma, the emotional um, feeling, being taught that I was innately sinful, that I was not worthy, actually created so much sickness in my body.
Mm,
That was my huge aha moment. When I crashed at 34, we had been transferred to Texas about a year, and I had my two babies in the back seat, my sons, and we were driving down our grocery store road. I knew this road, but the drugs and the surgeries and the disease had so affected my mental capacity, I didn't know where I was.
mm,
And it scared me. I had to pull over. I was in tears. I didn't know which direction to go. So when I finally pulled it together and got ourselves home, I realized if I don't do something, I won't see my 40th birthday. That was a very scary moment. So I marched myself into a health food store and said, fix me.
Mm,
So I actually got started feeling some relief with the alternative, the herbs and the supplements and things. But the real well being, the peacefulness, the joy, the lasting feeling that I'm okay, I am worthy, wasn't until I changed my mindset and examined my beliefs and discarded the ones that could not sustain the
mhm,
peace and joy that I knew spiritual life had to be good, but it wasn't feeling good.
mhm.
And it affected my body because my body was listening to all the negativity, all the victimhood, all the martyrdom that I was
Sure,
living.
sure. You were manifesting more of
Oh,
that by
yes,
holding that mindset of a lack of well-being.
absolutely.
We do that. Our thoughts become our things. Really, that's really the
Yes,
expression. Our thoughts become things. And so our thoughts become beliefs, our beliefs become actions, and our actions become things. And things meaning how we manifest in the world, things that happen to us. And so when we're not, it all begins with our thoughts, it's true. And a thought that you say over and over again becomes a self-limiting belief.
yes.
So we have to be very careful about what we're thinking about. So, would you agree that unhealed religious trauma will show up as the suffering in our life?
Oh, absolutely. When you have things that are unhealed in your life, no matter what the trauma is,
Hmm.
you know, is going to show up in your relationships, your career, your physical body, and your own personal spirituality. It is going to adversely affect all of those areas.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And so, how does one surrender the religious trauma and the suffering and allow grace into their lives?
I think becoming aware of it is, of course, always our first step. And then starting to examine, I always like to tell people they've got to start with remembering who they are. Who is that inside person? What do
Mhm.
they do all day? What do they think? What do they feel? What do they think about me as
Yeah.
the physical form, mind? So beginning to notice how we feel because our emotions tell on our thoughts every single time. So when you notice that you're feeling bad, what were the thoughts that you just were previously thinking?
Hmm.
And becoming aware that, oh, right now, in this moment, I feel good. What was I just thinking? Oh, yeah, they were appreciative thoughts. They were loving thoughts towards someone or something. So noticing how we feel, because that's our barometer, where we are on
Hmm.
that emotional scale, on that vibrational scale that is affecting us energetically, affecting
Yeah.
every aspect of our life.
Yes. And so I like what you're saying about noticing how we feel, like really paying attention to your feelings. Just going back to when I asked the question, you said the first thing is awareness.
Yeah.
And I just want to add to for our listeners, once you have that awareness, you have to actually move into acceptance also. That not acceptance that, oh my God, this is how it's going to be for the rest of my life, but acceptance that something is not right for you. And that not to feel guilty about it or ashamed, but just acceptance opens the door for surrender and opens the door for grace. When you're not in acceptance, you're not going to see the support that's coming to you in your life. So I just want everybody to remember that word first awareness, then acceptance, and
Mhm.
then surrender. That will allow, the true grace to come in. You won't be you'll be less boggled in the mind. You'll
Yeah.
be able to see the opportunities that are coming your way. Okay, so we're going to take a break now. You're listening to Hungry for Answers with me, Robin Clare, and my special guest, Marianne Pack, and we'll be right back. Hello, and welcome back to Hungry for Answers. To learn more about me and my work, please go to clarity.com. That's CLARE-ITY.com. And Marianne, how can people get in contact with you?
Oh, I would love for people to visit. I have two websites. One is easy, maryannpack.com. And then my book publishing is wearejoybooks.com.
Nice, wonderful. So we're going to jump into talking about joy. And so I have two questions together this time. What is joy and why does it elude us?
For me, joy is that inner being part of us that is the essence of who source is, who God is, whatever you name your higher power. So that's the essence, the love, the joy, the peace that you talk about, the abundance. Those are our inner core, the core of who we are. How we express it in the world is a little bit different. And that's what can elude us, is the expression of it, the belief of it, the living of it. But the joy is actually who we are embodied. It's tapping into it and allowing ourselves to actually live out authentically who we are, is I think where we get a little sidetracked.
Yes, so I like that because, a lot of us struggle with the suffering, with addiction, with depression, with a sense of unhappiness. But what you said gives me hope that behind all of that is like this joy that lives inside of us that perhaps we're protecting. Those joyful parts of us from being hurt or injured. And that protection can show up as addiction, as mental health disorders. And so we have to keep reminding ourselves that no matter what is going on in our lives, the joy is still there.
Absolutely. Because you can't extinguish who you are at the core of your being.
Right.
It's that, again, we've closed it off, pinched ourselves off from it. We've been indoctrinated to beliefs that have clouded it. But the clarity is there underneath. It's always residing there, calling us. That's why we notice when we're not in joy.
Mm-hmm.
When we're aligned with who we are, we feel the joyful. We feel it bubbling up. Sometimes we have those tears of joy and we're overjoyed. And then when we pinch ourselves off from it or deny it, then that's when we feel bad, when we have those emotions of depression. I suffered with that for years, even going to therapists and medicating through trying to deal with my depression. And it's like, depression is so far from me now, living the truth of who I am, that I am joy. It's hard to even remember those years. But it was multiple years of living with that suffering, that because I didn't know who I was. I kept listening to the lies of what my church had taught me I was, who I was.
Yeah. Yes. And we have to be able to find that joy within.
Yes.
I'm thinking about when I was first coming out of my corporate world and coming into the spiritual world, I was really trying to explain to my parents what I was doing because they couldn't understand because you didn't talk about spirituality. And one of the things I said is that religion is my outer relationship with God and spirituality is my inner relationship with God. And so you can see when you have a lot of religious dogma or protocols or processes that you're required to live. It's hard to find the God energy within you.
Mhm.
And this is probably why most people go on the spiritual path, is to be able to find their own inner divinity versus having to do what is required from a religious perspective. Now, I'm not saying, down with religion and up with spirituality. What I'm saying is that even if you're a very religious person, it's really, you should also be spiritual. And sometimes religion, there are spiritual parts of it or spiritual suggestions, but I think overall, in order to find the joy that may even elude you on the inside, we know how it eludes us on the outside, but on the inside, you must, I think, develop that inner relationship with your own divine source. Do you want to talk about that a little bit? What does that look like for you?
I do. Yes, I would agree that, you know, even my best friend that I grew up with, we were 8 and 9 when we met at church, of course. And she is still within the same church
Mhm,
structure that
mhm.
I left in my mid 40s. And she loves it. It is not toxic for her. She finds her joy and peace there. It
Yes.
just didn't work for me, and that's
Mhm.
okay. And we can still be friends, even though we see things so differently. And you were talking about, talking to your parents about it. When I left the church and when I was getting ready to leave the church, I wrote my family an 18-page letter trying to explain why I was believing differently. They didn't get it, but they didn't understand it. But can I read an excerpt from, it's a
No.
quote that I wrote this is my book, We Are Joy, Reawaken Your Joy. This is the first in a series that's coming out. And this was the clincher for me. This was what, even though I had been studying transformation and had been listening to mentors and coaches and, working through these traumas, that I finally took on that I was joy. And this is a quote from my mentor, Abraham Hicks. You are joy, looking for a way to express. It's not just that your purpose is joy, it is that you are joy. You are love and joy and freedom and clarity expressing,
Mhm.
energy frolicking and eager. That's who you are. And so, if you're always reaching for alignment with that, you're always on your path, and your path will take you into all kinds of places. You are pure positive energy that translates into the human emotion of joy.
Mhm.
To
Yeah.
know that we are the inner person inside, our core being, our soul, our spirit, is the pure positive energy that translates into the human emotion of joy. This is the essence that I'm talking about. Our higher beings, the universe, source, whatever, as an extension of that, we are part of that. We are that joy embodied.
Mhm.
And to remember that and to start knowing that, when I read that the first time, I just couldn't stop reading it or listening to it. I don't remember if it was on a video or if it was in a book that I was reading or a post. And I just took that on, and my whole body just shouted for joy and shivered with delight that no, I'm not innately sinful. I am joy in the flesh. I am
Yes.
joy embodied. That shifted everything for me
That's beautiful.
because I
And
claimed this over and over until it became my belief and changed
Mhm.
my life radically.
Yeah, and emotion is defined as energy in motion,
Yes,
right?
absolutely.
And so when you focus on the emotion of joy, you cannot help but bring joy into everything that you do. It's
Absolutely.
just it's just who you are, even when things are hard.
Mhm.
you're going to come and you're going to see the light, the greatest light of this. I was thinking about I had an event for like 12 years that ended with COVID. It was a quarterly Abraham dinner, Abraham Hicks dinner. And every quarter, um, a, the room would be filled with people who were studying Abraham Hicks. We would have Indian food first, and then we would do our own hot seat, which we called the love seat,
Yes.
and people would come up, and you had to answer these folks that what they wanted to talk about. You had to answer them in your best Abraham language. So even if you were already a therapist or you were a mom or a grandmom, you couldn't answer like that. You had to answer as if you were Abraham. And
Perfect.
so just for folks who don't know who Abraham Hicks is, so Abraham Hicks is a channeled Abraham is a channeled group that is channeled by Esther Hicks, and so they have wonderful books around the topic of the law of attraction, about how to attract into your life the life that you most desire. And so they have a whole system of information. Oh, it's wonderful. They have books, they have videos, they have all kinds of wonderful stuff. So the reason why I was telling you this, Marianne, is you can imagine the energy in that room when 30 to 50 people who were Abraham students would get together. It was just contagious and contagious in joy.
Yes.
To have everybody there who believe that your thoughts again become your beliefs, become actions, become things. And so the more that what Abraham would say, Marianne alluded to something called the scale of emotions, and that all the way at the bottom was despair and all the way at the top was joy. And so you can't go from despair to joy. They have other psychological terms for that. You're not supposed to go between those two so fast. But on the scale, there are different levels. The next, maybe from despair to sadness, because that moves you up a level. And so what Abraham would say is that you just have to think, you have to reach for a better feeling thought in order to be able to get to the next level on the emotional scale. And you'll watch yourself. Check that out. You can find the emotional scale right on Google. You can go there, or your own, whatever you use, Safari. And you'll be able to find that and see that how many different levels of emotion we have. And that really joy is a state of mind, but we're always working towards joy no matter what. And then somehow you just seem to find your way there. Like what did it mean for you? Or maybe that's not what I'm asking. How did you know that you were finally in joy embodied? Like what did embodied look like?
In talking about Abraham Hicks, the scale has 22 different levels on it. And it's also, well, you were talking about joy embodied. I'll answer that. For me, understanding again, remembering who I was, always, I know, it was reaching for relief. You're always trying to think of the next, what is the next thought that would bring me relief as you move up that emotional scale. For myself, knowing that I was joy embodied, I had to realize who I was, and that my body is the cloak of the spirit of who I am on the inside, that joy on the inside. So just knowing that if I'm joy on the inside, I should be able to radiate that out into my outer world. And so I would think, what does joy feel like? Well, joy feels like freedom, feels like hope, it feels like choices. And so I just go through those beautiful, energetic, emotional words or states of being, it feels like appreciation. So that's a state of being besides being, an emotional kind of state. So every time, I would find myself in those struggling times when it is difficult, I just keep asking myself, how do I want to feel? And what are those words I would use? Rather than putting conditions on it. I don't want to get too much in the conditions of, well, I want to feel this way because I want to go do this and do this, and I want to have this. If
Mhm.
you can get into the feeling state, it's about the vibration.
Mhm.
So I really focus on embodying those feelings. What does it feel like to be in freedom? It feels like choices. It feels like confidence. It feels like adventure. So I feel into every one of those words because I'm always reaching for the next feeling that feels like relief. And as
Mhm.
soon as you start doing that, you'll start noticing the more and more you practice those feeling words,
Yeah.
because those emotions don't don't live where our language is. In the limbic brain, those emotions. That's why they're always so hard to describe, because we
Yeah.
don't really have words for them. We have to feel them.
Yes, that's great. So we're going to be going to another break, but when we come back, what I'd love to talk about is our simple ways our listeners can bring more joy into their lives. So things that they can do, but I'm being guided to have us expand that to include ways that we can invite spirit into our lives to help us feel joy. So we'll be right back, guys. You're listening to Hungry for Answers, and see you in a couple of minutes. Hello, everybody. It's Robin Clare. And if you would like to learn about me and my work, please go to clarity.com. That's CLARE-ITY.com, or you can find me on Instagram at Clarity by Robin. And so I'm here with Marianne Pack. And Marianne, how can folks reach you?
They can go to my website, maryannpack.com, for services. And then I also have a book series, and that website is wearejoybooks.com.
Perfect. Okay, so as promised, we're going to talk the beginning of this segment about simple ways our listeners can bring more joy into their lives. And then my spirit guides were like, what about how we can help? So let's talk about both. Let's talk about the practical and the spiritual way that people can bring more joy into their lives. So, what are your thoughts on that, Marianne?
Anytime that we are in feeling, love or appreciation for something, um, to me, appreciation is such a key to tapping into the joy.
Mm.
So if we're practicing looking for things that we appreciate, speaking of it, feeling it, telling people how much we appreciate them or something they've done for us, the more we can start tuning into that state of being, of appreciation, it vibrates at the same level of joy, and you are just naturally going to start feeling the joy of who you are. So to me, that appreciation is the fastest way you're going to experience the joy that you want to. And that is your birthright.
I think that's also very helpful in relationships. Like I noticed that with my husband, we are extraordinarily polite to each other. Thank you. I appreciate that. Like we just go out of our way to, in the back of my head, I might be saying, of course you should take out the garbage. But in my joy looking person, I'll be like, thank you for taking out the garbage, right? Like it, and I mean it. But I think when we can even find that in our relationships, to just say, I really want to stop and say thank you, or I want to say how I appreciate that. And so I try to live that in all parts of my life. If I think, if I and not to I try to do it right away also.
Yes.
Not say, oh, I guess I'll call my brother later and tell him something. It's like, no, do it now, even if it's a text, even, or make a phone call, but just thinking of you and this, and I want to say thank you. And I think the more we can say thank you and mean it, the more joy we will have in our lives.
Because I believe that those little urgings, those little messages, those thoughts are what our intuition, what our inner being is telling us, go do this now.
Yes.
Go do this now. And the more we follow those intuitive received thoughts, um, the more we're going to see a response from it. And we're going to see improvements in our life. And then we're going to have another thought to go somewhere or do something or say something that turns into a bigger feeling of appreciation. Because when we're vibrating in appreciation, it's going to be returned to us.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
We attract that. And also practicing this in a practical way is you're actually physiologically changing your brain. You're rewiring your brain to look for things to appreciate rather than to complain about.
Yes.
And so that helps because you're disconnecting those old complaint sides. Because years ago, I was queen of complaining. I acknowledge that.
Mm-hmm.
So now to live so differently because I'm not looking for as many things to complain about. I'm looking for more things to actually appreciate or be thankful for. And that's where the path is in my brain now.
Yes.
I've
And I think,
created the new neural pathways.
beyond, of course, many people have jobs that, they're doing because they need to pay the bills. But if you have an opportunity to be on the entrepreneurial path, or even in a standard job, you really should be asking that question too. Does this job bring me joy?
Mhm.
Or will this opportunity bring me joy? So first and foremost, as Marianne said, you have to know what joy means to you. What does joy look like? Now, um, joy to you could be making enough money so that you can give to your favorite charities. So just knowing that, saying that I am doing this job because it brings me the joy of giving at the end of the month when I have extra money to do that, or I love this job because it brings me joy when I can complete a project. But the more that we focus on what brings us joy, the more joyful things come into our field of awareness. And just like Marianne said, the more we focus on things that we're complaining about, the more opportunities to complain come into our field of awareness too.
Absolutely.
I found that in my life, that I find that all the time. The more I'm complaining, the more opportunities there are to complain about. So I
Absolutely.
try to focus on how can I be joyful? How can I be of service? And I think being of service, and being of service joyfully brings more joy too. What do you think about that idea?
It's absolutely because you're doing it out of that love and joy. The shift, the energetic shift is from sacrifice. I'm not doing it any longer from sacrifice. I'm actually doing it because I love doing it.
Mhm.
Because I see that person as not that they need my help, that I'm going to fix them. It's that I'm seeing who they really are
Mhm.
as another soul, joy embodied.
Mhm.
You see the wholeness of who they are, not their part that we think sometimes may be broken and we need to help them fix them. If we have that attitude, the sacrificial type, official type attitude, we're disempowering them. We're saying we have to do for you what you can't do for yourself, rather than I'm doing this for you because I know what a wonderful person you already are,
Mhm.
who you are.
And if we take that and apply it to Abraham Hicks and the law of attraction, what you want to do is, if you're in a situation that you have a lot to complain about at the moment, there are situations like that. It's really, you want to see an outcome that's filled with joy. So you want to start to focus, even though that may not be the reality at the moment. The fastest way to get to that is to begin to envision a joyful outcome for that situation, and that sets up your vibration to be able to make that happen for your life, because it really matters to you that there be a joyful outcome, instead of like that it not making the complaining situation matter to you. You want to make the joyful outcome matter to you.
Absolutely.
You're right. So let's talk about your books. Let's talk about the 4 in the series. I'd love our listeners to hear more about them.
Yes. The first one is it's the We Are Joy series. And I had the idea to do a We Are Joy series, and then each book would be a different topic. And the point of these books was that there would be at least 12 lessons in each book, and growing on different topics. Um, but there are integrative questions or activities that people can do after each lesson. So if they wanted to take it even as almost like a coaching session, you would have a 3-month period that you could work on each week a lesson and do the prompts. So I wanted it to be much more integrative. We don't need any more information. We are on information overload. What we need is integration.
Yeah.
So that we can live those sovereign lives, creating our life and creating things in our lives and who we want to be. And we do that by the integration. We're doing it by the exercises. So each book is different. The first one was Reawaken Your Joy, because I wanted, it's that foundation. This is the foundational book of kind of what we've been talking about, that who we are and how do we express that in the world, authentically and graciously and with love and enjoyment. And the second book that's coming in May, is Sacred Crystals. It's We Are Joy Sacred Crystals. And this is with a friend who is also a dynamic crystal shaman. And it's going to be about how to use sacred crystals, Mother Earth's gifts to us,
Beautiful.
to help us intuitively tune into our inner being and our intuition. The third book that would be out in the fall is my spirit guides, who are called The Many. It's 12 messages from them. And then I write a lesson beyond what they've been talking about, and then integrative questions and prompts. The fourth book that's coming out in January is Unmuted Voices. We Are Joy, Unmuted Voices. And these are interviews on my podcast, the Dynamic Thriving Podcast. So this year's season is all about unmuted voices and how we may have, because of indoctrination or religious trauma, found ourselves muting our voice because it wasn't safe in the world to express who we are. And it's not just voice. It's not just a physical voice. It's how we express our life. And then how these people transformed and found, what was their aha moment? Or maybe it was a culmination of many moments that allowed them to begin unmuting their voice. And then how they're using that unmuted voice in the world for spreading more joy and more love. So I'm really excited that fourth book, Unmuted Voices, will be an anthology of all these stories about how they could give hope to people who may find themselves muted and then unmuting their voice.
That's beautiful. Very beautiful. And so you also have, if you could, we're coming to the end of the show, but to talk about the joy matrix.
Yes, the Joy Matrix is going to kind of follow along with the books. I have not formally launched it yet, but the Joy Matrix, it's to create and birth something. A matrix is a word for mother, so it's mothering. It's creating something new that's bringing out the joy of who you are. So we're birthing or rebirthing because
Yeah,
we had it when we were babies. We came
of
in with it.
course.
We
Yeah.
just got it squelched on us by the indoctrinations. And so
And
that book,
it'll be a community of
yes,
joy seekers,
yes, it will be,
joy
yes,
thrivers, I should say.
membership. Yes,
That's awesome. Thank you very much.
absolutely.
So, thank you, Marianne. This has been really enlightening, and I'm sure we've provided a lot of good information to our listeners about becoming joy again.
Mhm.
It is a divine right. Uh, we all have joy within inside of ourselves. So, as Marianne said, it's about taking the joy within and expressing it out in the world. And so I hope that you received some good information on that. And I just want you to remember, if you're struggling with addiction right now, that there is always hope for you in the outside world. There's places and resources in your area. But as we've talked about today, there's always your own inner divinity where you can go inside or check in with Mother Nature. There's always resources available to you any which way you turn, as long as you're open to receiving the grace that is available to you. So until next time, everyone, you've been listening to Hungry for Answers with me, Robin Clare, and we'll see you next time. Thank you. Thank you for tuning into Hungry for Answers. Learning to love ourselves is the one true solution to addiction. Make a commitment to healing today and see how you can reach your ultimate potential. Remember, you have a divine right to a life filled with love, joy, peace, and abundance. To learn more about me and my offerings, please go to clarity.com. That's Clare, CLARE -ity.com. See you next time.